Is Trump an asset or a liability to the Republican incumbents in California? We're back with the big deal. I'm Errol Louis. Last week, we reported on a half dozen or so U.S. Senate races that could determine which party controls the chamber next year. Tonight, we are turning our focus to the House of Representatives, where all 435 House seats are up for grabs. And the question is whether Republicans will be able to retain their narrow control of the House. Republicans are hoping to hold on to a slim majority of 220 representatives over Democrats' 212. 3 seats are currently vacant. But if Democrats win just 6 more seats and reach 218, they could regain control of the chamber, which would give them the power to bring legislation to the floor on a wide variety of topics. While many of the competitive House races are in battleground states, about half of the districts have Republican incumbents, and they're defending them in liberal states, notably New York and California. And they're being watched closely because not only do many of these seats lean Democratic, but President Biden won most of those districts in 2020. In California, Democrats are focused on flipping 6 districts. In New York, Democrats are seeking to win back these 3 districts, which they lost during the midterms in 2022. Joining me now with more analysis are 2 political analysts who are closely watching and reporting on these races in their respective states. Susan Arbetter is a political anchor for Spectrum News 1 in Albany, New York. Amrit Singh is an anchor for Spectrum News 1 in Southern California. And Susan, let me start with you. It was during those 2022 midterm elections when Republicans blindsided Democrats in New York by flipping 4 seats. How did that happen, and how confident are you that New York State Democratic Party has a plan to win those seats back?
Well, let's start with how it happened. So 2022 was quite a wake-up call, Errol, for Democrats. In a state where Democrats have a huge voter enrollment advantage, part of the Republicans' success has been blamed on Governor Kathy Hochul's weak performance in her own race for governor against former Congressman Lee Zeldin, where there were a few factors in play, including Hochul's sort of late acknowledgement that crime was top of mind for voters and that many voters simply weren't familiar with her. But the Dems also found themselves with a bunch of seats in play after redistricting. Now, regarding how confident New York Dems are about winning back those seats, I think it depends on the seat, but there is no question that Democrats appear to be in much better shape this cycle. Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries from Brooklyn, who we're going to be talking about a little later on, and Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, along with Governor Hochul, are spearheading a healthy fundraising machine and ground game. Also, thanks to yet another round of redistricting, NY22, which is right in the middle of the state and includes Syracuse in central New York, is now ripe for the Democrats to flip. Also, there are 3 swing districts in the Hudson Valley. NY17, where Republican incumbent Mike Lawler is facing Mondaire Jones. NY18, where Democratic incumbent Pat Ryan is facing Allison Esposito. And in NY19, a rematch between Republican incumbent Mark Molinaro and Josh Riley. And while there hasn't been that much polling, it does seem like the Democrats have a chance to flip at least one of those seats, but it's a real fight, not just a gimme for the GOP.
Okay, so now out in California, Amrit, Latinos make up roughly 1 in 4 California voters. If you look at the swing districts, they make up an even larger share of some of the most competitive races. Does the importance of the Latino vote give Democrats or Republicans more of an advantage in this election?
Well, Errol, you're right to key in on Latino voters. I mean, across the nation, folks are. And when it comes to the Central Valley swing districts of 13 and 22, more than half of the eligible voters there are Latino. In the Northern LA County swing district of the 27th, which is currently held by Mike Garcia, it's over a third of eligible voters there are Latino. And I recently spoke with Julian Castro, the CEO of the Latino Community Foundation. You may remember him as a former HUD secretary. He now works with this Latino operation here, which did some polling around Latino voters in all these swing districts, found that Democrats are largely doing better with Latinos than Republicans in all these swing districts by a significant margin. That's no surprise ever since the days of Prop 187 here in California in 1994, where there was a lot of scaremongering around Latino voters. The Latino vote has been reliably Democratic here in the state. But this polling also shows that for Latino voters in all of these districts, the biggest issue is the economy. Also, a majority of these Latino voters are concerned about border security. These are two issues that Republicans are obviously doing well on in this election season. Former President Trump making inroads with Latino voters also on these issues. So it's certainly one to watch when it comes to these demographics. And also, by the way, don't sleep on Asian American voters in some of these districts, especially the 45th, currently held by Republican Michelle Steele. There's a lot of red baiting going on in this district, Errol, between Derek Tran and Michelle Steele. Lots of conversations about their heritage, whether they're cozying up to socialist China ideologies and Mao Zedong, who will stand up to China. Lots of money going into this district. It's just another one to watch. It's a fascinating time here in California politics.
Okay. You know what, Susan, speaking of the money, if we look at the breakdown of ad spending on House races all around the country, it looks like New York and California account for the highest numbers. And so what are they spending the money on? What are the themes that are important in these House races, especially in New York?
Yeah, I think that the issues are the same nationally as they are locally. Immigration, the economy, abortion, they're the top issues in most of the House races in New York, though there are some local issues that are very important, like local economic development projects, including a giant Micron deal outside of Syracuse. But yeah, the money is pouring in. According to Open Secrets, more than $75 million has been spent by outside groups in New York's House races this cycle, and a vast majority of that comes from those House political action committees that are engaged in simply turning out the vote for each party.
Okay, and Susan, if Democrats are successful in regaining their majority, the House Minority Leader, Hakeem Jeffries, who represents parts of Brooklyn, New York, would make history by becoming the first black Speaker of the House. How has he been helping the party? This, of course, is very important to him. And what should our viewers know about him?
Yeah, well, he's Nancy Pelosi's successor. He worked his way up through the New York State Assembly by being very politically savvy. And he has chosen his fights. He picked Mike Johnson to retain his leadership, not Kevin McCarthy. He also provided increased earmarks, cash for local projects for all of his membership to keep the rank and file happy.
Okay, and Amrit, while all of this is going on, Donald Trump has been campaigning in New York and in California, trying to help Republican lawmakers who are considered vulnerable. In fact, he's expected to hold a massive rally this Sunday at Madison Square Garden in Manhattan. Is Trump an asset or a liability to the Republican incumbents in California?
Yeah, I mean, when you think about it, Errol, you got to click back to understand why it is that there are so many vulnerable Republicans in this election. And because you think back to 2020, as Susan was talking about, I mean, Biden did well in California, as always, and carried these districts that are now vulnerable. In 22, in the midterm, Californians mad about crime, mad about the border. Republicans overperform. And in all these swing districts, Republicans are going to need to outperform former President Trump. And the polling shows that they are in these districts so far, except for in the 41st Congressional District, a really hot button one in the Inland Empire, part of Palm Springs, part of the Riverside suburbs. That's an area where Ken Calvert is actually underperforming former President Trump. So you talked about Trump being out here and campaigning and rallying. It was with Ken Calvert in part to try and give him some of that Trump effect. But otherwise, these Republicans in some ways are often trying to make a little bit of distance between former President Trump. They know they need to do better. And the data scientists look at this, Errol, and they say the midterm election, lower voter turnout, the presidential election, higher voter turnout. This, they say, will help Democrats across the board in these districts. Also, some recent polling in these swing districts showed that voter enthusiasm amongst Democrats for Kamala Harris higher than voter enthusiasm for Republicans. But as you know, Errol, I mean, all this is going to come down to that day. What breaks these last 2 weeks? A lot of these votes already in process, but we're watching it very closely here, as I know you all are there in New York.
Oh, absolutely. Closing in on the final 10 days. Thank you both. Thank you for watching our YouTube channel. Let Spectrum News be your resource for balanced, in-depth political coverage, and click the subscribe button right here. You can also download our app or watch us on TV to learn more about the candidates, where they stand on the issues, and more. We'll see you then.